Okay, so I think this mic is working. Hopefully, you all can hear me from here. So I just want to thank the three of you today for making the time to really participate in this discussion. So as you guys know, in today's hyper-connected world, live streams of violence and suffering bring the brutal reality of genocides directly into our homes. So our discussion today will focus on how Canadian Muslims are connected to these struggles by addressing the role of global solidarity and how the struggle of our Palestinian brothers and sisters are also our struggle, most importantly. So I guess it's appropriate to pose this question to the three of you, and either of you could take a shot at it. How are the lives of Canadian Muslims connected to the Palestinian struggle? Stephen?
Hey, Islam, how are you doing? And Assalamu alaikum, Ikna, great to be here. It's a really good question. From our perspective, what we've seen ever since October 7th, and in previous instances of whenever there's violence in Palestine, there's a direct correlation to how it impacts Muslims here in Canada. And there's a very simple reason for that. The fact of the matter is that what Israel does in the Palestinian territories, as we've just seen on the screens here, is deeply unpalatable to most Western audiences. And Israel requires support from Western countries such as ours, the United States, Germany, the UK, in order to be able to maintain its economy, but most importantly, to be able to prosecute wars and the occupation of Palestine. If the planes don't stop coming, if the planes stop coming, if the bullets stop coming, if the artillery stops coming, if the oil stops coming, they physically can't continue to occupy the Palestinians. And so it is in their vested interest to make sure that the governments of these countries and the populations that vote for these governments have a pro-Israel stance. And that involves two things. Number one, they do not want Canadians to have an honest, open conversation about what's happening over there. They don't want people to see this. When people who are Muslims or Arabs are dying, they don't want to talk about it. When people who are Jewish or people who live in Israel proper are dying, and it's a completely different story. But the other thing is they want people in our country to be willing to send our college-age kids over there to die, our tax dollars over there, and diplomatic support. And the way they do that, in large part, is by using Islamophobia as a tool of statecraft. These are savage Muslims and Arabs that want to kill you or want to destroy you or want to hurt you. But we're going to fight them for you. We're going to fight the barbarians for you. If the average person in Canada, if the vast majority of people come to see Muslims as their neighbors, as their friends, as people that are like them, then it's much more difficult for people to find it palatable to see hundreds of thousands of them dying on TV. So Islamophobia is a direct tool, right, in order to maintain support for the pro-Israel lobby. It also goes for certain politicians. It drives votes. It also goes for certain media outlets. It sells newspapers. It gets clicks. So when there's violence in Palestine, whether we like it or not, regardless of whether you're South Asian or Arab, Palestinian or Egyptian, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, by virtue of being a Muslim person, your life is impacted here as well.
No, thank you for that answer. Before I, of course, elaborate, I would love to hear from both of you. Fawzi, would you like to add?
Yeah, I can. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, so I agree with everything Stephen said. I do, though, want to talk about this a little bit from an Islamic perspective, since this is an Islamic conference. I think we have a duty as a Muslim community that extends well beyond our moral conscience. And if we're waiting for a reason for why we should support our brothers and sisters, and if we want to be impacted first at a personal level before we do something about it, then we're totally misunderstanding our deen and what is expected from us. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, "Al-mu'min kal-mu'min kal-bunyan yashuddu ba'duhu ba'da." That a believer to the believer are like building blocks. They support one another. And he also says that مَنْ رَأَى مِنْكُمْ مُنْكَرًا فَلْيُغَيِّرْهُ بِيَدِهِ, that whoever sees an evil, you shall change it with your hand. If you can't, then with your mouth. If you can't, then with your heart. So we have an obligation as Muslims to do something about this, whether or not we're seeing the impact of here or the ramifications of it here at home. We are, like Stephen said, we are. But we don't need that reason to start doing something about it. We don't need that reason to start feeling that pain. No, that pain should be rooted in us. If we're unable to feel what our brothers and sisters are going through right now, then that we should take a look in the mirror and introspect about, what is wrong with us as human beings. To add to that, there is another angle. And Palestine is not any issue. Oftentimes when we engage with people of our community, we say, akhi, there's so many things going wrong in the world. Why would I do anything? So I ask back, well, are you doing anything about anything else, the other crises? And they say no. So I say, why is that an excuse then? You know what I mean? So this idea that because there's so much wrong in the world, I can't do anything about this one either, is illogical. Palestine holds a special place in our deen, in our aqidah. There's a reason why Al-Aqsa and the land around it, the land of Palestine, is a blessed land. All the prophets prayed there. Our own Prophet Muhammad ascended to the seventh heaven through it. All of that was to give us a key message that is important for us to understand, that Palestine is a barometer of our ummah. And when our ummah has never been strong, when the land of Palestine was not liberated and was not free. And the other way around is true. When the land of Palestine was liberated, was free, our ummah has been at its best. So this issue, we should take it to heart. And when we do, we're going to find the benefits of that reap well on us here at home and our ummah larger around the world as well, inshallah.
Right, Dr. Amjad?
If I may add, alhamdulillah, I think I can't agree with both. This creates Islamophobia, and there is like a duty on us from the Islamic perspective, but also from the humanitarian perspective. Even the regular Canadians, the civilians, and I have to correct what I misspoke. I was talking quickly. 100% are civilians. So this is 70% of them are women and children. But the 100% of these casualties, when regular people see this, they should have something that clicks into their minds. And if you remember the attack that happened in London, there was immediately before that, like a week prior or like 2 weeks prior, a disaster that happened in Palestine. And this Muslim family were killed in the streets of London, Ontario. And this is an example of how this can be connected. Wallahu a'lam.
Right, no, and I couldn't agree more. Thank you for, your answers on that. And I think what I have taken away personally is for us to realize that we may be individuals, but we are all interconnected as Muslims in one way or another. So we should really foreground that to, advocate for those suffering across the world. No, thank you. So Stephen, I do have a question for you based on advocacy. So Stephen, given Canada's place on the international scale and being a G7 nation, what can we do as citizens to advocate for Palestinian rights?
That's a really good question. There are several things that we can do, but I think your question couches it from the perspective of, as Canadian citizens, what can we do? Because the reality is, we're not going to send Halifax-class carriers or frigates to the Eastern Mediterranean. We have seen Canada impose a weapons embargo on Israel, but in terms of the net amount of weaponry that it's still receiving the vast majority of its armaments from countries like the United States. So the question as to what Canadian citizens can do, I think is one that's really important. And by the way, it's not just one that is relevant for Muslim Canadians. I think a lot of us here, I come from a family where, most of my family members are not Muslims. Prior to October 7th, this was not something that was at the forefront of people's minds. But people in my and my immediate circle, by virtue of what has happened, yeah, by virtue of what's happened, there's been a massive shift in just Canadian culture and the vast majority of people in terms of how they perceive what's happening over there. So despite the way that we see people talking about this on the news, the way that the average person feels about Palestine has changed. And one thing that Canada is able to do, it has cultivated for itself a reputation as being a country that can be an honest broker on the international scene. If you look, for example, at Canada's role during the Ben Mulroney government in the 1980s, of how it led international efforts to bring apartheid in South Africa to an end. It was very, very, very vociferous in terms of how it talked about the South African government, what was happening during apartheid. That is something that Canada can also do. Canada, the reality is, a lot of governments in the Western world, it is not in their vested interest economically in order to, have negative relationships with 400 million Arabs and 1/5 of humanity because they're supporting this one small Eastern Mediterranean country. But nobody wants to be the first mover. So as us as Canadian citizens working to make sure that our government is acting in a way that is representative, not of the interests of a foreign country, but in accordance with the way that the average Canadian citizen, the bulk of our own country, feels and the interests of our own country, that is important, right? And the ability for us to affect that change is much closer than most people think, right? So Canada, our country, can be a leader on the international stage in doing things like imposing sanctions on Israeli leaders, imposing weapons embargo, recognizing the state of Palestine. If Canada recognized the state of Palestine as a G7 nation, that would be amazing. So there are things that we can push our government to do, and there are things that our government should be doing, and we should be pushing our government to do, not just as Muslims, but as Canadian citizens.
Right, and I couldn't agree more. And I just wanted to briefly ask, and probably you could briefly touch on this. What besides, what Canada has or has not done, to support and advocate for this cause. There's a lot of youth movements, that are happening within schools. A lot of youth, MSAs, they organize, protests in Toronto and stuff that happen. We see a lot of that living within Canada, but can you speak very briefly on movements that happen in other parts of the world and how that kind of supports the Palestinian cause, and perhaps what the relationship between movements across the world, across borders, and the movements that are happening here?
Right. So it's very varied. For example, if you see what's going on in the Middle East, what's happening and how people feel about it is not necessarily represented by what their governments are saying. But if we stick to, let's say, Western countries, and more specifically English-speaking Western countries, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, the United States, in all of these different countries, what is happening in the Middle East, what is happening in Palestine more specifically, but the Middle East more broadly, is all now factored into the political landscape. You saw it in the elections, the UK elections. You're seeing it now, for example, in states like Michigan in the United States. I mean, the polls are extremely close between Biden and Harris. How Muslims come out to vote, even though they're only 1% of the population in the United States, could have an impact in the election. In Australia, in New Zealand, and when we're Muslim communities from across the world, everybody is sort of starting to think about this. So one, advocating, working with different communities across the world to advocate, to push their governments to act. Also in other senses, in other areas as well too, civil society, human rights organizations, international trade and business, they all have an impact in terms of how governments act and behave. And the more that people are able to coordinate their actions and work together in a way that advances the interest of those individual countries, the more effective they're going to be.
Right, thank you for that. And touching on the political aspect of it, Fawzi, I do want to pose this next question to you. And given your experience of being on the ground yourself, what can we do besides humanitarian assistance and political engagement to help the cause and help our brothers across borders?
Okay, so there's a lot that we can do. There's actually too many gaps. And before I talk about what we can do, I do want to highlight that in engaging with the community here at home in Canada, we hear a lot of excuses. We hear a lot about, although a lot is being done, the community has done a lot, alhamdulillah, but I feel like it's not enough. None of us here can or should claim that we're doing enough. And the excuses sometimes include, hey, I'm not skilled enough, or I don't know how to do X or Y, or I'm not credible, or the brother does it better, or worse yet, sometimes we feel like, oh, mashallah, brother so-and-so, he's doing so great, and we just mashallah, mashallah, mashallah. And instead of thinking critically about the gaps that we're facing as a community and trying to take this personally to heart. Palestine will be liberated with us or without us. It will be, inshallah. And I think the question we should all be asking ourselves is, are we going to be part of this journey? And if you look at it from that lens, all of a sudden, there is a personal responsibility on each and every single one of us. So if you look at yourself for the last year and you say, my activism before October 7th of last year and after October 7th of last year is the same and hasn't changed. How much I care about this topic before and after is the same. There is something wrong with that. Like, we really need to hold ourselves accountable, all of us. Whether you're doing something or not, you need to introspect and take a look at how much does this issue matter to you? And if it doesn't, there is more that we need to do collectively to work on ourselves. What can we do? There's a lot that we can do. So Stephen touched on political advocacy. Dr. Amgad, talked and can talk a bit more, obviously, about humanitarian aid and assistance and things of that nature. But there's a lot more that we can do in the education sphere. Are we educating our kids, our youth in our own community to care about this topic? How much do our kids know about and our youth know about Palestine? How much do they understand our history as an ummah? How much do they know about Umar bin Khattab and Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi? How much do they know about Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and the history in Masjid al-Aqsa? How much do they know about all of these things? Because if they don't understand these things, this cause will mean nothing to them as they grow up. So we have to start there. We have to start with our kids, with our youth, in our masajid. How many educational programs have we done in our mosques and our community centers to raise awareness about what this issue means to us from an aqeedah perspective, not only the human impact. The human impact is important. We care about everybody who's suffering around the world, Palestine or not. But this issue should have a special place in our heart, and we need to start there. Secondly, we have to take more steps, and goes hand in hand with advocacy, by the way, on awareness and changing the public narrative. What are we doing to educate our neighbors, our colleagues at work, the people that go to school with us? So all of those people, governments will take a topic seriously that the public takes seriously. And if the general public, Muslims or not, are saying, we demand action on Palestine, the government will have no choice but to start taking some real action. So if we all take our responsibility, imagine how many people, how many thousands are at ICNA convention, right? You go and every one of us changes the mind of 5 to 10 people. Look at the impact that could have. How many times have we engaged people on this topic seriously, right? And I know it's uncomfortable. It was very uncomfortable for me, even as a Palestinian, very uncomfortable. But you have to start somewhere. And I try to not, almost every conversation I have now, to just find a way to let this conversation see, or introduce it in a not awkward way, just so I benefit the other side a little bit. Not so much in a confrontational way, but try to make them inquisitive and So that's another angle I think that we all need to work on a lot more. Social media, traditional media, art and design and academia. These are all areas that are honestly, I would say, untapped. There's a lot more work now happening there. Op-eds and interviews and social media activity. There's a lot more that we can do, though. So, I'll wrap with this idea that we're not skilled to do any of this. I don't buy it. I think all of you have incredible skills that you can put to use. It's a matter of finding out what and starting. Honestly, it's about overcoming that initial fear and getting going on something. And inshallah, Allah puts the barakah in that.
Right. No, thank you for that. That was very insightful. And I think the whole, well, what I took away, and I'm pretty sure members of the audience took this away as well, that, when you start something, one, to not be afraid to start an initiative, but two, when you start it, there's that aspect of consistency, right? And, determination, and to kind of like not fall through with it. And the whole thing about, that we must do more, we must take that extra step to go further. Because had we done more, perhaps, and Allah knows best, but perhaps the situation in Gaza and Palestine right now would have been very different from what we're seeing. So on that note, Fawzi, how do you think the people in Gaza are feeling a year and a couple days past into this genocide?
I mean, pictures speak louder than the words, right? What Dr. Amgad showed on the screens, honestly, if that doesn't move us, I don't know how many words I can add on top of that to change that. But you think about it. I mean, I call my aunts in Gaza, every so often to check on them, and put yourself in their shoes. A year of bombing, where you're constantly chasing for life essentials, food and water, where you don't have a roof over your head, where you don't have a shelter to protect you from the cold. It's the winter months are coming back again now, or from the bombing. The injured or the wounded don't have the right facilities to look after them anymore. There's no infrastructure on the ground. And frankly, the death of smell is everywhere. I mean, that's honestly, when I talk to my aunts, they say, we just smell death everywhere. It's the, there's no sanitation. There's the bodies are scattered. So how are they doing? They're exhausted. They're really exhausted. They're tired. They're overwhelmed. But they're still resilient despite all of that, which is incredible. I mean, I try to think, what if I was there? Would I be as resilient? Would I be as strong as they are right now? And I don't know if I do have the strength that they have, but what I know is I'm here and they're there, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made that happen for a reason. That's their struggle, and my struggle is here. I almost ask myself sometimes and say, is this the right question? Like, is the question, how are they doing? Because mashallah, they've passed their test with flying colors. And the question is, how are we doing? Like, honestly, how are we doing? Are we still awake? Are we still following along? Do we still care about this a year into this issue? Are our hearts still tuned in? And I think that's a critical question. If they've passed their test, are we passing ours? And that's a question that personally scares me. Maybe I'll wrap with a quick story. When I called my aunt, a few weeks ago, I obviously, because I care, when I'm calling them, I'm sounding very in panic. I'm angry, and they calm me down. They say, hey, Fawzi, just everything will be okay, inshallah. And that kind of resilience, honestly, when they're the ones, I hear the bombing on the phone, and they're the ones telling me to calm down and telling me that everything will be okay. That kind of resilience is inspiring. And I just, wallahi, I close the phone and I feel a bit ashamed, because I go if they're going through all of this and they feel this hopeful and they're resilient and they're still standing up, what excuse do I have? Well, honestly, none. There's none. What excuse do I have to leave that conversation feeling the same way I felt before talking to them?
Right. Mm-hmm. For sure. I think we can take some questions from the audience towards the end a little bit. So thank you for that. We'll get to right into the end. No, thank you for that, Fawzi. Honestly, the brief description that you gave of your phone call with your aunt really just, I have goosebumps, because I couldn't imagine, talking to one of my loved ones and, having, their whole world collapse, and they just are so calm about it. Right? And again, I guess it's that having a high iman really gives you an increased level of resiliency. And that's something to really it's just, I have no words on how to explain that. And the other point that you said about pictures speak more than words, Dr. Amjad, I want to pose this next question to you. So some people, and including myself, when we see these frightening images on our social medias, it's very, very hard to look at. I know when I see them on my Instagram stories, I have to swipe away. Not that I don't care, it's just, I just can't bear to see something like that. So given that you were, conducting this medical mission and the pictures that you showed today on the screen, how were you able to deal with the trauma and the stress and the PTSD, if anything? How did you cope with all of that?
It's, alhamdulillah, it's a good question, and it's, I'm often asked this by non-Muslims, actually, because or the news media. For us, I don't think there is any, of course, it's stressful, and anybody, you don't have to be, I cannot claim that I'm a very brave person. I don't get psychologically affected. But subhanAllah, the real fact is all these visits and all whatever we're able to do there is psychologically very uplifting. It's completely the opposite. And the fact that you're able to make a change and deliver something gives you a lot of psychological support and reward. And I cannot tell you, Fawzi spoke about the blessed land. This is something that's written in Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa alladhi barakna hawlah. Allah is telling us that. This didn't come out of nothing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said there is barakah around this area. And if Surah Al-Anbiya, there is 2 verses speaks about Al-Ard al-Mubarakah. So it's a totally different planet. Wallahi subhanallah, Sam, who I've shown you his picture, he's an orthopedic surgeon, excellent orthopedic surgeon from northwestern Chicago. In our second trip, we came back, and like a few days afterwards, he called me up. He said, Amjad, when are we going back? I told him, we just landed a few days ago. And he said, I cannot tolerate walking into the OR with robotic instruments and hybrid rooms and amazing equipments. And he remembers the kids and the woman that he was doing hip disarticulation for them, or amputation for them, or the amputation for diabetic foot. Diabetes is a treatable disease, but there is no insulin, there is no metformin, there is no medications in whole Gaza Strip. But they come in with gangrene, and they end up with amputation. So to the extent, like you need lots of permissions, and the logistics is not easy. It takes weeks to get approvals. But he booked his flight, and he flied, and he waited for the permission to come. So it's very actually psychologically uplifting if you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help, and you have the faith, and you know why you're going and why you're doing this. Of course, I agree that some people are getting numb, and it's difficult to see these pictures, but in every time you do something, don't belittle anything that you do. And if you have the faith and ikhlas and intention to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you, and you will see the barakah. I cannot tell you the physical barakah and the psychological barakah and the blessings that I've seen, and all the people who went on these medical missions. They tasted it. They tasted the blessings themselves in their own life and their families and their surroundings. So this has been my experience, and the others as well.
Right, and that's a very interesting perspective, because I know in the media we see a lot of people returning back from medical missions and conflict and in conflict zones, coming back traumatized. But the discipline that you hold yourself to, up to believing in Allah to really overcome any challenge, that's very enlightening as well. So since you have this experience and background on international aid, do you believe that the whole concept of international aid addresses the root causes, or does it merely provide temporary relief?
Of course, it's very temporary, especially now. And you can see it after a year, the situation is getting worse. Like when we went initially in December, we took like 3 trucks with us, with equipments and sutures and instruments. But now the situation is getting worse. It's very, very limited, the amount of things that can go across. Alhamdulillah, there are still things are going through, but it's all temporary. And it goes back to what Stephen was saying, that you need the root cause, and things will need to be changed on a political level to allow the permanent aid and the like helping the infrastructure.
Right, right. And I just hope that, you know, the thing that we were talking about before, the aspect of consistency, perhaps if organizations and, you know, individuals stay consistent to what their goals, missions, and values are, perhaps we could go beyond just temporary relief, right? And I know that we're coming up to time, but I do want to wrap up our conversation with this aspect of long-term peace that a lot of people talk about, a lot of people have discussion with. So, I pose the question to each of you, and perhaps Stephen, you could start us off. What does a sustainable and just peace look like from a Palestinian perspective? Is long-term peace at this point even attainable?
So that's a really good question. I think, first of all, in terms of thinking of that question and how to answer it, as Fawzi said, at the end of the day, as Muslims, we have to believe and have faith that in the end, God will give justice to the Palestinian people. And that we all have a responsibility, and as Muslims and as human beings, to work for peace. As people that, you know, live here in a peaceful country, in a Western democracy where we eat 3 meals a day, and, you know, the cream of the crop of the Muslim world is here. Thinking about what can we do in order to foster peace in the world, it is part of our responsibility. But at the end of the day, I'm not a Palestinian. I work every day in my capacity as the CEO of National Council of Canadian Muslims with Palestinians across the country. With Muslims across the country, with Canadians from across the country. Ultimately, what a sustainable solution looks like in Palestine is going to be up to the Palestinian people themselves. What I think is important for us to be able to do is to have a clear, lucid understanding of how we can work in our capacity, with our talents, with our abilities, with our resources, to support that process. There's a lot of different ways that this can look like. People talk about a 2-state solution. People talk about a 1-state solution. There's so many different geopolitical and political constructs. But at the end of the day, it's important for people that live here in Canada to do a couple of things. Number one, get educated about the situation on the ground. 2, talk about it with your neighbors, talk about it with your friends, talk about it with your colleagues. 3, get politically active, because at the end of the day, it doesn't just impact, it's not a conflict that stays over there. The reality is, it follows you here. It does. And so for many of us, it's a domestic issue. When after October 7th, hate crimes, we have a legal clinic at NCCM. A 1,300% increase in hate crimes came through our doors in Canada. And the last thing I would say is pray and have faith. These are all things that we can't be doing, and inshallah, I have faith that one day Palestine will be free.
Fawzi, would you like to add some remarks on that?
Happy to. I definitely don't have a monopoly on the Palestinian view of this, because you'll hear also amongst the Palestinians slightly different views, but in my humble opinion, you know, busying ourselves with the mechanics of 1-state, 2-state, and how that's going to occur is a distraction. It's a true distraction, because that debate has been happening since 1948, and it's led us to nowhere. And what I will say is, peace is not a means to an end, it's the end. And the path to peace goes through justice for the Palestinian people. And you know, what we hear on the streets of no justice, no peace is not just a slogan. It's not a slogan. And I very much believe that in order for us to achieve peace in the region, the Palestinian people have to have their full, and I say full, rights returned to them, including the right of return, the right of determination, and everything else that the Palestinian people have been asking about. Sometimes I feel like, honestly, we're bothered that there's no ceasefire, and we are. But I feel like we're bothered for the wrong reason. We just want it to stop so we can sleep at night. Which is, you know, we want peace the easy way, and they want peace the right way. And I really believe, I appreciate what Stephen said, because it's very true. We have to support them in their quest, not impose on them what we want or how soon we want it. So I feel like with that lens in mind, we should really understand the dynamics and really ask for justice for the Palestinians. And once we have that justice for the Palestinians, I think peace is automatic. It will be achieved, inshallah.
Right. Well said. And Dr. Amjad, would you like to close us off?
Well, I think it's an excellent point, but I'm going to tell you my experience from the Palestinian people who I saw. Because, you know, of course, it's a very important point, and it's peace for the whole world, not only for Palestine. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. The whole message of Islam is mercy for the whole universe. They are not concentrating. We follow the ceasefire, we follow the negotiations, and this group went, and this group, they are in Doha, they are in Cairo, this is happening, they are meeting tomorrow, they're concentrating on their job. And what I learned from them is there is no impossible. There is absolutely no impossible. And they do what they are supposed to do. Of course, I'm talking about the medical people I saw, and even the construction people, this public affairs hospital that I showed you the picture. How can my colleague from Windsor, we looked at it and we told them this will take like 6 months. If it's in Canada, it will take 6 months to be renovated. And we said, no, we'll tell them 3 months because we're in Gaza. They told me we'll get it done in 3 days. They have this ability that there is absolutely no impossible. And they reminded me of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, إِذَا قَامَتِ السَّاعَةُ وَفِي يَدِ أَحَدِكُمْ فَسِيلَةٌ فَاسْتَطَاعَ أَنْ يَغْرِسْهَا فَلْيَغْرِسْهَا فَإِنَّ لَهُ بِذَلِكَ أَجْرٌ. In English, if the day of judgment comes in, like tomorrow or the day of judgment, or now is the day of judgment, and you have a seed in your hand, and you have the ability to implant it, implant it. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't stop at that. He didn't say just implant. He said, you will get rewarded by that, because this is your job, and this is, so don't belittle what you do with the MPs, don't belittle what you do for donations, don't belittle what you do for this cause. This is what will eventually bring peace to the whole world, not only to Palestine.
Right, thank you so much. And we do come to the end of our panel discussion today, and I have learned a lot of valuable insights from, your wisdoms, and your experiences and, different aspects of this cause. And if we talk about the situation and this topic in accordance with the theme of the convention, which is displayed up here, Ummah X, preparing for unity and impact, I hope that we could all take away that, despite us being our own individuals and having our own identities, at the end of the day, coming together and standing as an ummah, only then can we really tackle, injustices together, and perhaps more efficiently as well. So I want to thank you three for your time, and it was a lovely discussion, and perhaps in the future we'll, chat about this stuff in a different atmosphere. Thank you so much.